And Phil, from your point of view, based on what you've read and seen, um, to what degree is the administration really trying to muck with vote by mail?
Oh, I think it's shameless, and I think it's transparent. And they're allowed to get away with too much of it again because the press has been done a very poor job. I mean, when Trump goes out and rails about ballots that are unsolicited, he's really only talking about the 10 states like Oregon that send them out automatically to everybody. And almost none of those states are a battleground. He didn't care. He's going to lose Oregon and California. He's going to win Utah. Uh, so there's a ridiculousness about these overwrought claims that my first reaction is just don't give it any airtime. But it's really clear that there's an effort to try to undercut the faith of certain voters in the process. And I think it's working to some extent because you see Democrats who might have several months ago, 70% of them said, yeah, I'll request a mailed out ballot. Now it's maybe 50% or 40% in some states. And the message that I'm trying to get out and others at the National Vote at Home Institute is that if you apply for your mailed out ballot now, you're going to get it probably within 4 to 5 days. The Postal Service, and he's trying to muck with the Postal Service, but the Postal Service still does a remarkable job of meeting standards. Let's say it's a day or two late, but it still gets it there in 4 to 5 days. Apply for the ballot and then return it in person if you're really worried about uh, the delivery on the other end. And again, 90% of the anxiety I think that people have about the Postal Service is the return of the ballot once they've finished filling it out. It's not the getting of it. Every state right now, you can apply for a mailed out ballot. This is where drop boxes and the second half of the return equation that Oregon and Colorado and Washington have done such a great job with is so important. You know, the drop box has been one of the biggest innovations in our system over the last 20 years that we've used it. There are now 300 of them. And I can be in Astoria or Burns or Joseph. And even though I'm a Multnomah County voter, if I deposit my ballot in a drop box in those places 300 miles from home, it will get counted. It will find its way back to Multnomah County. And if I've signed it and it's verified, it'll get counted. And contrast that with states like Ohio, where the Secretary of State had refused to follow a court order that said you have to let counties do more than one. He went to court to fight that. Now, the court just yesterday said, no, you can let counties do as many as they want to. Whether he will or not, I don't know. But that's an example of how really unnecessary laws and constraints on this process is unnecessarily reducing the interest of people in voting in a way that's been proven safe and effective and gets a lot more people to cast a ballot.
I almost hate to ask this question, but I feel like
Yeah.
I have to. I only say I hate to ask it because it's been asked and answered so often. But the issue of concerns about fraud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah, Oregon, I think the cases are 0.0000, maybe there's another 0.4. We've had some cases for sure. Early in my time as Secretary of State, I actually prosecuted a county commissioner who had forged his wife's signature on a ballot. The election was interesting because it was a recall election against him. He survived it handily, but he lost his office anyway because we convicted him of a crime. We caught it. And this is the key thing. Signature verification, 100% of the ballots is the usual standard for doing it. I think it makes I think it's essential to the system. Some will disagree with that because signatures do change and handwriting changes. But states like Oregon, Colorado, and others have a cure period. So for some reason, it's determined that a signature doesn't match. I get notified. That's mandatory. I get X number of days to fix it. That's been an issue in Oregon. We had a very close ballot measure a few years ago on genetically modified organisms where there was a real effort to contact voters whose ballots had not been certified because of those reasons. So yeah, we've had cases of people doing really stupid things and committing crimes with mailed out ballots. But it's such a small, near to the vanishing point problem, and there's never been any systematic, organized effort to do it, much less succeed at it. I remember what a clerk once told me when early on when I raised the question back in the 1990s. And she said, "Phil, have you ever wondered why counterfeiters never counterfeit pennies?" And I had never asked that question before. And she said, "Phil, if you're going to risk the jail time and do the crime, you're going to go with 20s and 100s, i.e., there's far less stupid ways to try to steal an election." I have far more worry about that with the misinformation campaigns that are out there, both domestic and foreign, far more worries about electronic voting machines that aren't secure. Harris County, Texas has, I think, 1.5 million voters, and they don't even have a paper record for their electronic voting machines, which in 2020 is just absolutely, cruising for a bruising in the election world, especially now that Texas is in play by many accounts, both for state legislative races, Senate race potentially, and the presidential contest.
So, Phil, obviously, one of the primary advantages of vote by mail is it increases voter turnout. And that has been the experience in Oregon since your
Yep.
institution
Yes.
of vote by mail. Is it your expectation that the voter turnout on a percentage basis in the 9 3/4 states that are going to have vote by mail this election will be higher than in the other 40 1/4 states?
I think so. I mean, in 2016, if the rest of the country had voted at the same rate of active registered voters that Oregon did, and we were not a battleground, haven't been for a long time, but if the rest of the country had voted at our rate, we would have had 20 million more people cast ballots in 2016. And how that would have affected who actually won in key states, who knows? We'll never know. What I tell people is that higher turnout, it boosts it among the young, among the old, the Democrats, the Republicans, especially the non-affiliated voters, and about a third of Americans now say they're non-affiliated. Rural, urban, Black, white, Latinx, Asian American, it really lifts everybody's boat. Now, how that works out in the mix as to who ends up winning or not is something that I'll let political scientists and political campaign hacks debate, and they will probably forever. All I know is that over the last 30 years, Democrats have feared that higher turnout hurts them. Republicans have feared that higher turnout hurts them. Both can't be right. I think neither is. I think it's most healthy for our democracy when more people vote. I truly believe, and this is what's kind of been underneath my advocacy for all these years. I truly believe that the health of our small d democracy is much better, especially over time, when 80 or 90% of us vote, even when all my candidates lose, and I'm certainly a strong Biden supporter, than when 50% of the people vote and all my candidates win. And I think it's important for people to look into their hearts and say, do you really believe in the fundamental premise of the American experiment in democracy? Because that is the basis of it. And we've seen over the centuries efforts to suppress the vote. Right now, I'm reading the biography of Frederick Douglass, and it's just harrowing to read about all that hope that happened in the wake of the Civil War when blacks, at least black men, were enfranchised. There were blacks elected to the U.S. Senate from Mississippi, from South Carolina, other places. And then over a period of 50 to 60 years, white supremacists systematically undercut the right to vote. Sure, they still had the right to vote in the Constitution, but systematically through laws and various techniques, really destroyed the franchise for Black Americans in these places. And I have said it many times, the traditional voting booth, the insistence that you must go to the polling place to connect with your ballot is, I would argue, the most effective, though subtle, the most effective voter suppression tool that remains in American life. And obviously not everybody agrees with that, but my own epiphany from someone who voted against the bill to expand it in my first and only term as a legislator in 1989 to becoming a full-on advocate by 1993 was the epiphany I had that I had been confusing a particular ritual of democracy, a beloved one to many, very familiar to all of us, but I'd been confusing the ritual with the essence, which is turnout and participation. And I'm hoping that, again, when the dust clears after this particular contest, that state legislators across the country will be, and people, citizens, will be focusing on that particular question. How do we boost participation in a country that has one of the lowest rates in the world?